On Tuesday, about 155 million Americans are going to head to the polls to vote for the next president of the United States. If you're joining me on this video, I'm going to go ahead and posit that you already knew that. In fact, if you've been anywhere near the news media lately, you probably already knew that. Here in the United States, it's been one of the top trending topics for months and months and months and months and months. But even in Europe, it's been a hot topic conversation lately. Over on yournews.com, it's one of our top trending topics for about the last 2 weeks. So we all know what is at stake. Donald Trump against Kamala Harris, the next president of the United States, and what that means for America, Europe, and the entire world. I'm Wagner. I'm a political strategist, analyst, and head of polling for Your News, and I'm here to help walk you through every step of the process as we get ready for next week's key vote in the United States. As we've been discussing, there is the US presidential election, but today we're going to be talking about the other races that matter, those for US Congress, and how those will impact both the next president of the United States and also how they could impact Europe. When the current system of US government was established in 1789, the founding fathers created 3 separate bodies to control the federal government. 1, the office of the presidency, 2, the Supreme Court, and 3, and most importantly to them, US Congress. I say most importantly to them because their initial intent was that Congress wield the most power and authority. And throughout much of the 19th century, that was in fact the case. Over time, though, especially throughout the 20th century, and especially over the last 40 or 50 years, more power has rested with the office of the presidency. Still, Congress wields a ton of power and authority over the federal government. First, they are the body that passes the laws, both chambers of Congress, the higher chamber, the US Senate, and the lower chamber, the House of Representatives. Secondly, the House of Representatives, the lower body, is the one who controls the power of the purse. That is essentially the funding for the US government. Lastly, there are powers that traditionally reside with US Congress that have been somewhat circumvented over the years by the office of the presidency. Take, for example, something like declarations of war. The United States Congress, and thus the United States, technically hasn't declared war since the late 1940s. That was the Korea War. More recent wars, from Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan, those have all been waged using something called the executive action, waged by the office of the US presidency, somewhat diminishing the power of US Congress. Still, Congress wields a ton of power and authority in Washington, D.C., and specifically, there are members of Congress that wield immense amounts of powers in Washington, especially on partisan issues. Take, for example, someone like Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is a Democratic Congresswoman from California. She was also recently, under a decade ago, Speaker of the U.S. House. That put her second in line to the U.S. presidency, just behind the vice president. Now, she's no longer in that role today, but she remains in U.S. Congress and wields a ton of power, especially on the Democratic side of the aisle. Let's look back to the summer. After the campaign debate debacle with Joe Biden, and he was fighting for his political life, initially it seemed like maybe there was a chance that he could stick around. A few Democratic congressmen jumped ship, and there were, of course, members of the party across the country and financiers who were demanding a replacement. However, there wasn't a huge push on the Democratic side for him to drop out. Well, that was until Nancy Pelosi went on air and failed to give her full support of the president.
But we all have been in touch with people close to the president. So it's not a question of not having an opportunity to make our concerns known or have some questions answered. He has a bad night. Now, again, I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
Once that happened, I began to question how long Joe Biden could remain in the race, and it wasn't that much longer. Currently, the House of Representatives is controlled by the Republicans. They hold a narrow 8-seat advantage of the 535 in the House of Representatives. Over in the other chamber, the U.S. Senate, well, they're narrowly controlled by the Democrats, 51 to 49. And that includes a few independents that caucus with the Democrats. So you're beginning to see a trend as the U.S. is concerned. A lot of our politics is very, very, very tight between Democrats and Republicans. So how is it shaping up for this election, and can we expect any shifts? Going into Tuesday, it looks like both chambers could actually switch what their majority representation is. Let's start in the U.S. Senate. First of all, of the third of the US Senate that's running, the Democrats are having to defend more seats than the Republicans. That means that there's more opportunity for the Republicans to steal some seats and gain some ground in the US Senate. According to the most recent data by racetothewhitehouse.com, they currently give Republicans a 62% chance of winning a majority in the US Senate. That same data shows that they would win 52 seats. That would be a 3-point swing going in favor of the Republicans and give the Republicans control of the US Senate body. Now, looking at the US House of Representatives, that data flips almost entirely on its head. They're currently projecting with 70% confidence that the Democrats are going to win the US House of Representatives this time around and take 221, give or take, seats. That would be a complete flip of what the current system is, where Republicans currently hold 220 of the 435 seats. If that data and those projections hold true, then whoever becomes the next president of the United States, whether it's Harris or Trump, their job becomes significantly more difficult when Congress is split the way it's projected to be right now and the way it currently is. That means passing signature legislation on domestic issues, getting an aid package to either Israel or Ukraine. All of those items become more difficult when there is one party trying to stonewall the other from getting that legislation done. Just like the US presidential election, this is going to come down to a handful of states for US Senate or a handful of districts for US Congress, and that's going to decide who ultimately wins US Congress and what the makeup of our legislative body looks like in 2025.